Oh, it's that time of year. Yes, the biggest game on Texas's regular season schedule is under 72 hours away. Texas and Alabama in a top 12 showdown. We've got week one reactions. We've got an impromptu special guest that you might have seen on this show last week and have seen plenty of times before. My guest, Emmy Nixon. Welcome back. This is Deep in the Heart of Longhorns, episode 16. I'm planning on 3 shows this week. Tonight, tomorrow before the NFL opener, and then Friday for my official prediction. We're going to get Emmy's thoughts on Texas Bama at the end. We're going to talk about that game, get into it a little bit. But first, we've got week one reactions, as it was a jam-packed week in the world of college football. Week one, a pretty good slate week one. I think better than we've seen in years past with the level of competitiveness in the marquee matchups. But we got a loaded week two, and we'll be talking about all of that later this week on the Deep in the Heart of Longhorn podcast. If you're watching live, make sure leave your questions, comments, and opinions in the chat, and we will get to those when you do, whenever it is convenient for us. Emmy, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. I'm in Mexico right now. I'm in Cabo. I got the waves right behind me. I'm right on my patio of my room right now. Um, I'm great. I was a great intro, man. I am so excited for this weekend of football. NFL is back. We're gonna get into that tomorrow on our main podcast. But man, this show is gonna be all about college football. Week one slate. It was honestly just so good to just sit down on the couch and just catch all the football again.
It was absolutely fantastic, starting with what we got on Thursday to what we got on Monday, with maybe one of the more surprising outcomes of week one. Um, let's just first start with probably the most surprising thing of week one, and that was the elephant in the room, the Colorado Buffaloes beating TCU 45-42. Look, they have a roster of 75% transfers, over 70 new players on scholarship. Nobody thought that they would win this game. I think they were over a 20-point underdog to a team that, albeit, lost a good amount of NFL talent. I mean, when we talk about TCU, we're talking about Max Duggan's in the NFL now. We're talking about Quentin Johnston. We're talking about their running back. I'm blanking on his name. We're talking about uh, Hodges Tomlinson. We're talking about Steve Avila, the NFL level guard that I think was drafted early on in the draft. They lost some NFL talent, but TCU is still predicted to be, a top half level team in the conference of the Big 12 this year, and I think they still can be that. But what did you see from both sides, from a Colorado and TCU perspective, and what surprised you most about the way that Colorado played on Saturday?
I mean, you got to point to Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter. I'll start with Shadur Sanders. I mean, this is a guy who put up big numbers at Jackson State, playing in the HBCU circuit of college football. A lot of people questioned his arm talent, and I think he showed a little bit more zip on the ball. But what was more impressive was what he showed mentally. He clearly put in a lot of work. He was polished, his footwork, and just reading the game and picking his spots for when to be aggressive. Um, and there were times where he was willing to throw up that 50-50 ball, but he was picking his spots and he wasn't reckless. He was really tiptoeing that line, and that's what I really enjoyed about watching that game from him. It seemed like he really understood when to take those shots, and he had a really high level understanding of the offense, despite only being in that Colorado building for a few months now. And that's really the main takeaway from all this is Deion Sanders has just completely overhauled this roster and gotten these dudes to buy in. And I mean, the methods of his coaching, I think, just everything about it in terms of just the discipline that he teaches and the way he wants his guys to go about it. It works. I think that game proved that, to go into a hostile environment like Fort Worth, to play TCU and beat them. I mean, that's big time. That's really big time.
It's very big time. There are a couple aspects to this, right? The national media is on this. I mean, they are on it like, a hive of wasps that just got attacked by, a football. Something hit the wasp nest, and they're now out in full force. You got people who like Dion. You got people who don't like Dion. Whatever your thought is on Dion, whatever your opinion is on Dion, he's going to do it his way, and he's pretty brash about it. He's going to be straightforward with you. He doesn't really care about the media. I don't think he gives two shits about what the media thinks about him. And look, if you're Colorado, a program that was 1-11 last year, and quite frankly, let's just be honest here, for the past half decade has been irrelevant in the landscape of college football. Like, when's the last time on this podcast before this year we talked about Colorado football? Never. And, you don't hear it. You never heard it on any of the other prominent college football shows out there. Rarely did you hear it. Now everyone's talking about Colorado, the diehard college football fan, the casual college football fans, and it's because of Deion Sanders. That's why nobody thought you could bring in as many transfers as he did. I think it was 51 total transfers, almost a full NFL roster worth of transfers. An NFL roster on game days 53, 51 transfers, over 70 new scholarship guys with, I guess, the recruiting class that they brought in. And some of the guys that were shipped out of the program. Just the way that the Colorado offense operated, with an offensive line that nobody thought was going to be able to hold up as well as it did, especially in week one. And, basically an entire new roster offensively with a new offensive system with Sean Lewis, who deserves a lot of credit, along with the entire coaching staff, for the game plan for this particular game. Sean Lewis comes over, hired from Kent State, really good hire by Deion Sanders. This offense looks like it's going to be really good this year. There's still questions on that offensive line, but man, just the efficiency and the discipline right out of the gates in a hostile environment was the thing that stood out to me. And then you got to start talking about the individual performances. Shedeur Sanders, we knew he had some talent. I mean, he's obviously going to have talent. I mean, it's God-given. He's the son of one of the greatest athletes, period, of all time, Deion Sanders, as we remember, at least in football history, along with guys like Bo Jackson. I mean, I think he's thought of in that light. Performed well last year at the FCS level. He actually won the Jerry Rice Award, which is actually given to the top freshman in FCS. Back in 2021, played well last year. I think he had 40 touchdowns and 6-7 interceptions. Was pretty good. Nobody saw this coming, though. That Colorado offensive line played really well. They were disciplined the entire game. Sanders over 500 yards, a record-setting performance in the program. And man, Travis Hunter, we'll finish with him. My goodness. He played 129 total snaps as a two-way player. He was a five-star recruit coming out of high school, the number one overall recruit in the 2022 recruiting class. So not last year's recruiting class. That was Arch Manning, obviously. But the year before that, he was the number one guy, and boy, did he show it. That's what a five-star player looks like. And he did it on both sides of the ball. 11 catches for 119 yards. And this is all in, 100-degree heat, week one. 11 catches, 119 yards, a couple pass breakups actually, and an interception that when you look at it in hindsight, that interception near the goal line where he kind of stepped in front of the guy in the flat, man, if he doesn't get to that ball and that ball gets by and TCU catches that, that's the difference in the game right now. I mean, with the 45-42 score, if TCU scores right there, boy, I mean, Colorado still played really well, and we'd be talking about, how good Colorado looked in a loss. But, I mean, that was a game-changing play. So, boy, he looks awesome. If they go on an unexpected run and they have a really good season and he puts up monster numbers and continues to do it on both sides of the ball, he could get into like the dark horse Heisman conversation. I don't think he's going to win it because it's just a loaded quarterback year. And I think one of these quarterbacks is probably going to end up actually winning the award. But he could be in that conversation. He can maybe even get to New York if we get to like really insane territory. But people need to see it on, consecutive weeks. As far as the defense is concerned, there's a long way to go there. I mean, they're just going to have to score a lot of points to win football games this year. But, you're going to Nebraska this week. Or no, you get Nebraska in Boulder this week. Then you get Colorado State. So 2 more winnable games before the schedule really starts to pick up. And you got to go to Oregon, and you host USC at the end of September and beginning of October. So, man, we'll see what happens, but I'm really impressed. Really impressed. How could you not be?
Yeah, and to jump off of what you said about it being a great quarterback year, I'm going to go on the record, man. I think this might be the deepest year of quarterback talent in college football history, maybe. I just don't remember a year, at least in my lifetime. I feel really strongly about it at least being in my lifetime. I don't know about before that, but man, you look at a dude like Michael Pratt at Tulane, who didn't have a turnover-worthy play that entire game and was just throwing far hash missiles just down the sideline. Like, are you kidding me? And he's not even like he's an afterthought in terms of this QB class. And I mean, he's ultra talented as well. So that just shows you how deep this really is, man.
Right. And look, from a TCU standpoint, just real fast, I think TCU is still going to have a really good season. They're a really good football program. They continue to put out players into the NFL. They have guys on that roster. Still, they have a lot of talent. You saw they could still score. I mean, their offense was a little choppy early on, but they can still score. They can still put up points. They got some issues to fix defensively. And they're obviously probably not going to make the run that they did last year. But when we talk about TCU, I think they're going to be one of those teams that ends up with Sonny Dykes, as he's now a proven commodity as a head coach with his track record. I think that quarterback, Chandler, is his name Chandler?
I think so.
I'll have to check that real fast. But that quarterback, I think, will continue to get better as he gets more experience. And I think TCU will end up still having a really good year. Remember, last year, and I know Tulane is now like a really good football team, but last year, K-State lost at home to Tulane in I think it was week 2 or week 3 of the season. And K-State ended up winning the Big 12. So, you never know with these type of things. I still think TCU will have a really good year. They do have some issues, though. But we're not going to.
I think TCU will end up being a team that you don't want to play week 7, week 8, week 9.
Right.
But
they're
go
going
ahead
to
and say what you wanted to.
They're going to continue to get better throughout the year. They're going to be one of those teams that come November and December, you're not going to want to see them because they're going to have it figured out. They have some, things to figure out here in September and October, but once they get it going, you don't want to play them. We have some comments. My roommate from last year, David, is in the chat. He says, "We're so back." Yeah, we'll talk about Texas here in a little bit if that's what that's in
Yep.
reference to.
Yep.
Uh, David also says, "Yes, the Pac-12 won all their games in Week One. They enter Week Two, the Pac-12 with a 13-0 record. They're the only undefeated conference left." Now, some of that can be attributed to some, level of competition, I think. But Oregon, man, did they put a beat down on Portland State, scoring over 80 points. Bo
Yep.
Nix looked fantastic. Uh, you talk about USC, whose offense continues to look incredible with the addition of Dorian Singer, the transfer from Arizona State, the wide receiver position, and Caleb Williams, who's just an absolute alien, just like the guy that the Yankees just brought up from the minor leagues. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, uh, who
And then
else? I mean,
Washington.
Washington,
Washington
Michael
really
Penix.
impressed me.
Yeah, let's talk about Washington. I mean, they're the team. It's kind of tied to Texas because they beat down on Texas in last year's bowl game for 3 quarters, pretty much. Um, what were your thoughts on Washington? I mean, obviously Michael Penix Jr. is going to be a talking point, but man, they look really good.
Yeah, I being on the West Coast this week on vacation, I really made a point to try and stay up and watch some of those later games on the West Coast, and I know Washington ended up playing early, but I ended up watching the tape delay of that game, and man, Michael Penix Jr. is the real deal. I'll say that straight out. Like, outside of that bowl game last year, that was the first time I had ever watched him play, and I knew he was an injury prone guy up to that point before that season last year. But if you look at what he's done since he's arrived at Washington, and now that he's a, like some time removed from some of those injuries that he had, it's time to believe, man. I think the arm talent, the feel for the game, and just the poise in the pocket is great too. Just having a feel for when to extend plays, that's showing that it factor, that pocket presence that's so important to translate to the NFL. Man, just he checks so many boxes. I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah, he does check so many boxes when it comes to being a prospect and possibly entering the draft after this year, which I think he will, barring some kind of injury. When you look at Washington, man, they got it going there in Seattle. They returned, a lot of talent from last year. They ranked as the number one passing offense in college football last year. So what they did on Saturday wasn't much of a surprise to me. They have a talented receiving corps with Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk. They return 7 starters offensively, 7 starters defensively. They have a really good defensive line in front seven that's going to get after you. Um, a defense that keeps on improving year after year after year. When you look at their schedule, though, I want to see, where they get those bigger games. They do get Oregon at home, middle of October. They have to go on the road to USC, but they get Utah at home as well. Another team that impressed me in the Pac-12, and I know they played San Jose State, but Oregon State. DJU, man. Apparently, he wasn't the problem at Clemson based on what I watched on Monday night. He might have been a problem, but he wasn't the problem, as it was made very clear on Monday night with Clemson's performance. Man, he was really impressive, throwing 5 touchdowns. We'll see how Oregon State continues to progress, but they're a top 25 caliber team. I mean, the depth of the Pac-12 this year, if we include Colorado into that conversation, and maybe, who knows, a team like Arizona State or a team like Arizona with their talented freshman quarterback. I mean, this is a really deep conference. They could, I think, if not already right now, they might have an argument, at least by the end of the season, to be the second best conference in all of college football.
Yeah, it's sad that it's come to where they're having this golden year of Pac-12 football in the year where it's all going to collapse. But I mean, I guess it is what it is. I guess, and it's better late than never in terms of the product on the field right now. It's as good as it gets in terms of stacking up to the rest of the country. It's right there. The quarterback talent, and I think some of the skill position talent doesn't get enough credit as well. There's a lot of great wide receivers. Obviously, the one you mentioned earlier, Dorian Stinger from USC, is a main one that comes to mind. But there's a lot of them. Travis Hunter, obviously.
Yep.
And this conference, man, it's a gauntlet. It's a real gauntlet.
Yeah, you have Oregon with Bo Nix, who put up a really impressive, performance in Week One. Now, the level of competition will definitely ramp up. And look, Oregon is going to the last place I'd want to be at night in Week Two, as they're making the road trip from Oregon down to Lubbock, Texas, and you're going to get whatever you think of Lubbock, Texas Tech and Jerry Maguire's team after they went up to Wyoming and lost to Wyoming on the road in, one of the bigger upsets of the weekend, along with what happened to Baylor, which we won't talk about much today, as they lost to Texas State. Congratulations to Texas State on getting their first ever victory over a Power 5 team. Pretty awesome stuff. And not only did they beat Baylor, and not only did they beat Baylor on the road and a really good coach in Dave Aranda, but they basically put it on them. I mean, Baylor was struggling to stay in that game. They were struggling to stay within single digits most of the time. Texas State 42, I think it was 42-31 or something along those lines, final score. So congratulations to Texas State. But man, Oregon, we're gonna see. I think they're gonna beat Texas Tech, and I probably think they do it by a decent margin. But we've seen crazier things in college football. And Texas Tech is gonna come out, 15 flavors of pissed off after what happened last week, up in Wyoming. So that's an interesting game. I know it's happening at the same time as Texas-Alabama. So most eyes will be on the Texas-Alabama game, I have to imagine. But just putting it out there right now, I'm not saying Texas Tech is going to beat Oregon on Saturday. I'm not expecting that. But, I mean, just don't overlook Texas Tech, Oregon. Make sure you don't overlook Texas Tech going into Week 2.
Yeah, early season trap game, for sure.
So there are two more things I want to touch on before we really start to dive into Week 2 and specifically Texas, Alabama in the second half of this episode of the Deep in the Heart of Longhorns. Thank you to our 2 live viewers right now. Greatly appreciate that. Continue to put your opinions and your thoughts and your questions in using the chat.
Live chat.
Yep, the live chat. And again, you can find us on YouTube. You can find our episodes of Deep in the Heart of Longhorns on YouTube, usually every Tuesday and Friday. But for this week, since it was Labor Day, and since I had some things going on, and since it's Bama week, we're actually going to be doing 3 episodes Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, leading up to Saturday, where one of the biggest games in college football that will take place this entire season will take place in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night. So I wanted to touch on 2 more things, as I mentioned. Number 1, what we saw on Sunday night with Florida State and LSU. And number 2, I don't know if you got to see much of Clemson and Duke on Saturday, but I also wanted to touch a little bit on that game as well. Let's start with Florida State and LSU, though. I know you watched some and if not most of this game. What are your takeaways? Where's your headspace now?
Yeah, I think those Florida State receivers won this game. LSU could not cover on the outside with those guys 1v1. And ultimately, that led to them not being able to blitz Jordan Travis. Jordan Travis is having all day to throw in the pocket. LSU went to 3-man rushes a few times here and there, and Jordan Travis is just too good, too experienced, too smart to just throw a 3-man rush at him. He's just going to be patient and pick you apart. So I think it was a combination of a lot of things, but I think Florida State was just the better team that night. I think LSU will be fine. They got some things to figure out, but I don't think that was their best performance by any means. And I think on the Florida State side of things, it gives you more margin for error when you can face a team like LSU and feel like we can win on the outside. When you don't have to scheme up stuff, when you can just go say, hey, go run a go route and win. And that guy's just going to do it. Be confident. That simplifies everything. That's it. That opens up the run game. That opens up everything.
Yeah, I thought, well, first of all, Jordan Travis played a fantastic game, especially in that second half. I mean, he was poised.
Second half was great.
He was making accurate throws into some good coverage by LSU. I mean, he was throwing dots. And, man, I thought the Florida State, and I said this last week, I thought the Florida State receiving corps was going to be good. But, man, I think they're better than good. And, look, this could be a little bit of an overreaction, but that's sometimes what we're going to do here on this podcast because it's fun, and it's fun to have these discussions. I think the trio of Johnny Wilson, the Michigan State transfer, Keon Coleman.
Was it Caleb something?
Yeah, Keon Coleman, the Michigan State transfer who had a hat trick on Saturday night with 3 scores. And then Ja'Kai Douglas. I mean, this receiving corps, I think is better than good, and it's going to be good all season long. This was, a team that I think this part kind of went overlooked coming into the season. And it doesn't always mean that this particular part of the team is going to be improved just because you return everybody, as we've saw with some other teams that returned all their offensive line starters in week 1 or so far. And I could speak to, some of the problems that Texas had on Saturday on the offensive line. But I thought Jordan Travis was fairly well protected all night. Florida State's offensive line played really well. I didn't feel like, LSU was, out physicaling them at the line of scrimmage. If I can speak tonight, I thought, Florida State has a bunch of athletes on that team, and Mike Norvell, the way he's recruiting, the way he's using the transfer portal, with a couple NFL first-round pick caliber players on that defense, starting with Jared Verse, the Russian who had an impact Saturday night, Kalen DeLoach, the linebacker, Tatum Bethune, Akeem Dent in the secondary, Fintrell Cypress, the Virginia transfer, made a couple plays Saturday night against those talented LSU receivers. Returning 11 all ACC selections from 2022. Florida State, now looking at their schedule, Southern Miss, Boston College, Clemson, who we're about to talk about, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Duke, who looks very good, Wake Forest, Pittsburgh, Miami, who we don't really know a whole lot about. They could be good. They might not be good. We'll find out when they play Texas A&M on Saturday. North Alabama, and a bad Florida team, in my opinion. I think, Florida State has, with that win on Saturday night and how dominant they look to the point that they're now ranked in the top 4 by the AP poll, and I think deservedly so. Man, just watch out. They've got a team. And I think Jordan Travis is right up there with Caleb Williams, with whoever you want to throw into with Drake May, with whoever you want to throw into the Heisman conversation, guys that could be in New York. Jordan Travis is right there. So those are my Florida State thoughts. Clemson, who we thought, might even be better than Florida State, who we thought, is right up there with on the level of Florida State in the ACC. And hell, they still might be. I mean, maybe week one was sort of an anomaly type situation. But did you have any thoughts on that game? Has your opinion changed on Clemson at all? What are your
Yeah,
feelings?
I still see a lot of talent there on that Clemson roster. Believe it or not, I think they just weren't ready to play. I watched that game and just watching that game back from the All 22 on some YouTube channels that I've watched. It felt to me like Kay Klubnik was kind of predetermining his reads at different points. On third downs, he was kind of throwing prematurely from clean pockets. It just didn't feel like they were in week one regular season mode. It felt like they were a little bit too nonchalant with things, just in terms of just route running, just their attention to detail, getting the quarterback and receivers on the same page. It was just brutal on so many levels. And then obviously the two turnovers in the red zone. I mean that's just bad complimentary football at that point. The fact that they were moving it up and down the field tells me it's not hopeless. It's definitely not. There's a lot of things to work on, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement, and they need to make that improvement fairly fast. It's in a couple weeks. Florida State's going to come to town, and man, Florida State has a lot of athletes.
Yeah,
I think Kate Klubnik is still pretty wet behind the ears. He's still very young. There's still a process of maturation that has to take place there. I don't think they were ready to play, and I think that's sort of an indictment on the coaching staff. They didn't really love the game plan by their new offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley. I thought Will Shipley looked like one of the best running backs, one of the best players in college football, but otherwise didn't see a whole lot of potential for dynamic playmaking in the receiving core. I think Clemson right now is, due to their for whatever reason, Dabo's hesitancy to use the transfer portal, to use NIL, and that's a totally different conversation for another day. I don't think they have that dude at the receiver spot. I think they have talent at the receiver spot. Don't get me wrong, but remember they used to have guys. The Justin Rosses of the world. Who else can you think of? Those elite
DeAndre
Hopkins,
T. Higgins.
They don't have that guy, I don't think, right now, and I think it's hurt their offense a little bit. I think they're going to get better as the weeks go by. I'm not selling all of my stock quite yet on Dabo Swinney. I do have my criticisms, though. I think if we get to the end of September and say Florida State comes to town and beats them by 2 touchdowns, and they're 2-2, already out of the college football playoff discussion, going into October, a place where the Clemson program has not been in a long time, I hope, and I'll just say this, I hope that opens Dabo and this program's eyes to what they need to start doing in adjusting to the current climate in college football. Whether you like it or not, in order to compete with the top programs, which we know Clemson can, we know they have the resources, we know they have the facilities, we know they have the head coach to do it, we know they have the coaching staff to do it, we know they can recruit high-level talent. They have no problem doing any of those things. They have good culture. Everything is set up there, right? They just, when you look at, the top programs in college football right now, it's a different model of talent acquisition than just primarily building your roster through the high school ranks. Now, recruiting is still the lifeblood of college football. You have to recruit at a high level, but you also have to fill those holes using the transfer portal. And, why can't U.S. Clemson? I mean, look what Florida State did. They got potentially what might end up being one of the better additions in the transfer portal and a guy in Keon Coleman who was just at Michigan State. Like, if you're Clemson, you should be doing that same type of thing, in my opinion. And there's no reason you shouldn't be. And in the changing climate of college football, whether you like it or not, you just gotta adjust. I think that's the. I think
it just feels like they're a little too stubborn for their own good at the moment.
Yeah.
I think with how college football is now, the balance of power can change in an instant, just like that. There's no time to think like, oh, maybe we can get by without having a ton of transfers or this and that. It's like you got to be ahead of the game. If you're not ahead, you're behind. If you're not ahead, you're losing. Like you're just not going to win in college football the same way you did 5 years ago. You're just not. And now the entire narrative surrounding that Florida State Clemson game has completely flipped. It's going to be interesting now. It seems like out of the teams in the ACC, Florida State is the team to beat now.
Yeah, and look, a wise man once said, don't draw conclusions in week one, make observations, though.
Right.
And, man, I mean, it's hard not to, right, after that performance by Florida State, where at one point I think they outscored LSU in the second half 31-0 until LSU scored later on in the game. I just see a little bit of a talent gap right now in terms of the high-level talent on those rosters. I think, well, let's just save that for later on in September when that game actually comes, closer. Anything else in terms of week one that, things that stood out to you? Maybe, your takeaways on Texas, since we're going to transition now into week two and kind of getting into Texas, Alabama. Anything else that you want to put out there as we close the book on week one in college football?
Well, I think I just got to shout out J.J. McCarthy. Last year, I think I was lower on him than most just because I just didn't see the pocket presence or the eyes in the back of his head that's needed to, be a high level prospect, I guess. And that's kind of the way I look at college football. I really look at it from the lens of the NFL because I love the NFL so much. Maybe that'll change with time, but nevertheless, in this game, J.J. McCarthy showed that high level pocket presence that he was missing last year. The arm talent has been there. It's been there throughout his entire college career, but there was just a little bit more polish this time around. And it feels like he really took a step forward there. And it's exciting to see because it really is a balancing, a balance changing player in terms of the Big Ten. Whether or not he becomes elite, it would really change things in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give a quick shout out to a couple more teams and players before we get into Texas Bama from week one. Number one, I thought Joe Milton at Tennessee, although they were playing Virginia, I thought he looked really good. And, man, I think he has the strongest arm in college football. I think that's been, pretty clear already. Now, there are other strong arms out there, but I thought he was really efficient. That Tennessee offense still goes warp speed. I think it's going to work with Milton, in that offense. They still have lots of weapons. Their pass rush looked really good. Their defense looked better just in terms of the fundamental things, tackling, so forth. Tennessee, don't count them out yet in the SEC. I don't think anyone is, but I think they're still going to be really, really good. 499 yards of total offense. They outgained Virginia by almost 300 yards. Um, and, Virginia, they're in a tough spot with their program as they had the best of some players last year, and they're just in a totally rebuilding situation right now. But that was impressive from Tennessee, the way they dominated that game physically. Really impressive. A&M, and I said this last week when we did our buy or sell segment, and we talked about A&M. I don't want to overreact, but I saw really good things from that offense in week one. Now, I want to see more of it this week when they go down to Miami to play that road game on Saturday afternoon. But I thought Connor Wigman looked really good. And I think this group of A&M receivers is really being underrated. Not talked about enough as to how talented they really are. A guy like Evan Stort, who was a 5-star in a couple of years ago, 2022 recruiting class, one of the best receivers in that recruiting class. Anais Smith, who's obviously really, really talented. Noah Thomas is, that trio of receivers, along with Reuben Owens at running back, that's, some real super blue chip talent. And I think people just don't talk about A&M's receiving corps and how good it is enough, because the past couple of years they haven't had the necessary means to make the most of that talent that they have at the receiving corps. So it hasn't looked like that. It hasn't looked the way that it looked on Saturday. Now they have, I think, a guy who's going to be a really, really good college football quarterback in Connor Wigman, another 5-star guy. That A&M roster up and down is loaded with talent. But it's, as most people think, it's now or never for Jimbo Fisher. If it doesn't happen now, when's it ever going to happen?
Yeah.
As the SEC only gets tougher next year with Texas and Oklahoma coming to the conference. Giving A&M their credit for this week, I thought Bobby Petrino did some really good things, but I want to see more of it. And then finally, North Carolina. I thought that performance against South Carolina on, what was it? It was what night was that? I can't even remember. Saturday night. I thought their defense looked better. And if they have an average defense with a really talented offense and Drake May, they could be a player in the ACC, like a legitimate player up there with Florida State to win that conference. So I wanted to give a shout out to former Texas coach Mac Brown and their defensive coordinator and that coaching staff for having those guys ready to play what I think is going to be a really good football team by the end of the season in South Carolina. Take that for what it's worth, but those were my 3 shout outs that I wanted to give before we get into what we've all been waiting for the next 15, 20 minutes. Bama, Texas. Now, I want to lay out some very interesting nuggets that I think our live viewers will enjoy, and I think you will get a lot out of this, or at least think it's interesting or fascinating when I lay those things out. But before I do that, I want to hand you the floor. Just give your initial thoughts on this game. Where's your head at?
Well, I didn't watch Alabama beat the crap out of Middle Tennessee, but from the highlights I saw, Jalen Milroe scares the shit out of me. I'm not going to lie. That dude is a beast. There's obviously a lot that is going to have to go right for Texas to go into Tuscaloosa and win this game. But, man, one of them is they're going to have to force Jalen Milroe to be a passer. I think what he showed running the football, it's pretty clear. He's dynamic as a runner. He's gonna probably scrape off 50-yard runs like right up the alley of the defense here and there, just because. That's just who he is. That's just what he does. But they got to limit it. Texas has to limit that. The other thing is, we got to see a better performance from the Texas O line. We've been hyping up this group all summer, man. They got to show up. This is a game they got to show up. I think some of those things that we saw in week one could have just been jitters. It could have just been, just getting a feel for the game here and there. Maybe they just needed to have some more reps at game speed than what they had before this game. But man, it was not great. Other thing, I got to mention Quinn Ewers. I don't know what to expect going into this game for him, but I think the run game's got to support him, and he's got to trust his arm. I don't want to see any hesitation in terms of, little extra hitches in the pocket or patting the ball. He's got to be confident and just go be the guy we recruited. He has all the talent in the world. We've said this over and over and over again. I think the mental part of the game is where he's got to improve right now.
Yeah, in terms of what we saw last week, Milroe was impressive. Now, take it with a grain of salt. It's against Middle Tennessee State. All due respect to Middle Tennessee State. But, man, you are absolutely right when you say Texas is going to have to find a way to keep him in the pocket and not let him get outside the pocket and make explosive plays with his legs. He's going to get yardage on the ground. He's just too good not to. And he has a chip on his shoulder in this game for reasons I'll explain later, as he was originally committed to Texas before Ewers committed to Texas and reclassified. And then, Milroe decommitted as Sark was recruiting him when he was at Bama. Then Sark goes to Texas and recruits Ewers. Ewers comes in, Milroe decommits, and now he's at Bama. So Milroe wanted to be a Longhorn, but because Sark left Bama, came to Texas, brought in Ewers before he ultimately darted to Ohio State shortly after. It's a fascinating, in a weird way, Ewers and Milroe will always be tied at the hip in terms of the way that they were recruited in their college football careers and how these things play out, as now, interestingly enough, they're actually going to go head-to-head in what is one of the most anticipated and biggest games of this college football season. So that's one storyline. And, you obviously mentioned it. I thought, first of all, Xavier Worthy looked like the best player on the field on Saturday. And I thought, do that. I think one of the matchups of the season is going to happen this Saturday. We talk about the game within the game all the time. Kool-Aid McKinstry against Xavier Worthy. That is NFL first-round pick on NFL first-round pick. That is potentially top 15 pick on top 15 pick. Man, I can't wait to watch that. I think Saban's going to do whatever he can, sort of like Belichick still does and used to do all the time. He's going to do whatever he can to take away Xavier Worthy as much as possible. You can't totally negate the impact that Worthy's going to have on this game, but he's going to do whatever he can to make life hell for Xavier Worthy in this game. But Xavier Worthy looks like the best player, maybe on the entire Texas roster. And I think whatever you have to do to get that guy the ball in space and to get Ewers' confidence going early on in the game, use Xavier Worthy. Do whatever you have to do. Open it up. I don't think Texas totally opened it up last week offensively. I think Sark kept it fairly simple for the most part. We saw a couple, razzle-dazzle type things. They want to make Alabama think. They want to put some things on tape and make Alabama think just a little bit. But we know Sark is going to reach down into the bag this week and hopefully have that game plan ready. I want to see A.D. Mitchell get more involved than he did. Obviously, he caught a touchdown pass in the third quarter, which was nice to see. He's going to be used a lot in the red zone, but I want to see him more involved early on in this game. There are some – we talk about, injuries all the time in these big games. Bama's secondary is not totally healthy. It's the one part of their team right now that comes into this game with some health questions. So I think if you're Jordan Whittington, if you're A.D. Mitchell, if you're Jatavion Sanders, if you're Jonte Cook, got to find ways to maybe exploit that. I'm super excited, though, to watch this Texas receiving corps, especially Xavier Worthy, go up against a really talented Bama secondary. I think that's a matchup within the game that's going to be really fascinating to watch. What I'm not so confident in and what I'm not so excited to watch, Texas offensive line, you hit it right on the head. They have to be better. I don't know what it was on Saturday, but Rice was in the backfield way too much, whether it was running the football or throwing the football. They were getting interior pressure. That trio that we talked about and that I talked about in my offensive breakdown, which you can still go back and watch. It's not, too late to go watch that. Of DJ Campbell, the freshman, who got his real first college start, Hayden Connor, and Jake Majors. The most maligned part of this Texas football team a year ago, that interior offensive line, did not show much improvement, if at all. In fact, I think it showed regressment. Is that a word? It regressed.
Regression. I think regression is the word.
Yeah, regression. In week one. Now, look, they're not going to tell you, but I think they were looking ahead a little bit. And I think Texas, when they get into those kind of situations, they knew that offensive line didn't have to play great. They were just going to end up, eventually the talent, gravity takes over. The talent wins out. They'll be fine. They still beat down Rice 37-3. Rice gets a late touchdown late, but that was a really impressive performance by the defense. And one of the reasons I have confidence that Texas keeps this game close is because of that defense. I think they have top 20 defensive potential, and I don't think that's an overreaction.
Yeah.
I think we saw this defense play well for most of last year, and it continues to do that. Like, it carried over into this year. Like, they were well coached, not a whole lot of penalties on the defensive side. T'Vondre Sweat was dominant. He looked like day 2 NFL draft pick at the very least on Saturday, and he's going to need to do that more consistently. Jalen Ford continues to be an All-American caliber player, and that secondary is loaded. I'm very confident about Texas's ability to corral out, to match up one-on-one with Alabama's receiving corps. That receiving corps is good, but Texas, I think, secondary matches up really well with their receivers. My biggest two concerns, though, continue to be that interior offensive line, which I already talked about, and then Quinn Ewers in particularly one aspect, and that's throwing the deep ball. For whatever reason, and this has become a thing now, dating back to last year, Quinn Ewers' numbers throwing the ball 25 or more yards downfield in his Texas career so far are horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I think I heard the stat earlier, 4 for 34 for his last 34 attempts completed, 25 or more yards down the field. Something along those lines. It's bad. And you saw a couple really, those Texas receivers were running wide open on Saturday. You saw one down the right sideline later in the game to A.D. Mitchell that they missed. You saw one to Xavier Worthy down the same sideline where Quinn basically threw Xavier Worthy out of bounds when Worthy had the guy beat by at least 3 or 4 steps. You saw one down, I think, the left sideline to, I think it was Worthy again that they missed, or Quinn just totally overthrew him. I don't think Texas can win this game without having at least 1 or 2 explosive plays in the passing game.
Yeah.
So that's going to have to get better. So Quinn Ewers throwing the deep ball, having enough time to throw the deep ball, that starts with the offensive line, because Bama, if that offensive line brings the performance they brought on Saturday to this game, Quinn Ewers is going to get beat up. It's going to be ugly. And those Bama players are going to get there faster. They're more athletic. I mean, they're going to put it to you. So we're going to see how those aspects develop. Do you have any thoughts in response to what I've said so far? And I want to get your prediction before we get off this podcast. I'm not going to give my prediction until either tomorrow or Friday, but I want to know your prediction.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say is the other thing that we talked about a lot was fourth quarter and just late game adjustments in general. I think that's what this game is going to come down to. That's what a lot of games this season are going to come down to, in my opinion, or a lot of the bigger games. This defense is going to keep us in games, and I think the offense is going to be really good, but there's going to be points and times in games where the defense just has a feel for what Texas is going to do, and Sark is going to have to respond with a great play call to just get the flow going again.
Right.
And that's been where Texas has struggled, if we're being completely honest. And I hope it changes Saturday, but for now, I'm not going to bet on it changing Saturday in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
Probably in the top 4 places you don't want to play in college football. So I'm going to say Alabama wins in a close one, though. I'm going to say maybe a little low scoring in the first half and the offense is getting going in the second half. I'm going to say it's 38-35 Alabama.
Okay, so you had Texas comfortably covering the spread. It's a 7-point spread right now. I don't think that's changed as of right now. I think that's a fair line, and giving Bama a touchdown at home at night, which I'm about to get to here in a minute. But you have the offenses figuring out a little bit more in the second half. And hey, look, if we get that, even if Texas loses, I feel like that kind of game where it's, fireworks
Highly
in
contested.
the second half, and a highly contested game, maybe even comes down to the last couple of drives. That would be right up there for the best game in college football all season long already. So I like that prediction. I'm not going to give my prediction now, but I'm probably on a similar wavelength as you. I'll just say that for right now. Now, before we get off, and Emmy talked about, Tuscaloosa being a place that you don't want to play, especially in prime time. And, there have been teams, like it's not impossible. There have been teams since Nick Saban took over at Alabama that have won in Tuscaloosa. It's not impossible. It has happened before. But, for all the Texas fans that before the season had a lot of confidence after week one, I'm just going to warn you, this is just to serve as a warning going into Saturday night. All those Texas fans who were drinking the Kool-Aid, and I guess rightfully so, due to all the talent and hype around this program going into the season, which I think still remains. I mean, a lot of that still remains. I don't think anyone's necessarily overreacting to what happened and the issues that, were present against Rice on Saturday. I think a lot went into those type of things. And I think they will be better. Now, how much better, we will see. But I think they will improve. One of the things they say in college football is the biggest improvement takes place between week 1 and week 2. Whether or not that's true, for this situation, we'll see. But for all those Texas fans that were talking about, Alabama doesn't have a quarterback, Texas is going to whoop their ass, they're going to go in to Tuscaloosa, they're going to win by 2 touchdowns. There were a lot of Texas fans that were echoing that exact same sentiment or something similar coming into the season. Respect them because they're standing on the table and they believe that, and for good reason. They had their reasoning. But I'm just going to warn you with these stats. Nick Saban took over at Alabama in 2007. So it's been about 16 years now. Okay? I think this is his 16th or 17th season in Tuscaloosa. And obviously he's had a ton of success. 5 or 6 national championships. We know the story. He's lost 8 total times at home since becoming the head coach at Alabama before the 2007 season. And I think our one viewer will enjoy this, so listen carefully. Those 7 losses are as follows. First year, the infamous loss to Louisiana Monroe at home. One of Saban's first games at Bama. Surprising, but he actually did lose to Louisiana Monroe 2007. Georgia at home in 2007. LSU.
Matthew Stafford.
Yep, LSU at home in 2007. 3 losses at home in Saban's first year. Okay, then we go to 2010. They lost to that Cam Newton Auburn team at home, that national championship team. Obviously, that was a really good football team.
Yep.
LSU in 2011 with the infamous 9-6 game that diehard college football fans will remember. A&M 2012, the Johnny Manziel performance. Everyone remembers that. Ole Miss 2015 is one a lot of people forget, but that's, that was a pretty infamous game. And then LSU in 2019 with Joe Burrow. Those were the 8 home losses in the entire career of Nick Saban at Alabama. Okay? None of those losses for Bama were by more than 7 points. In other words, none of the 8 teams that have beaten Saban at home in his time at Alabama since 2007 have gone in and won by 8 or more points in Tuscaloosa. So for all the believers and Texas is going to kick ass and they're going to win by 2 touchdowns, and hey, I'd love for those people to be right on Saturday. Who wouldn't want those people, aside from Alabama fans, those people to be right on Saturday? But it's never happened before. Saban's never lost by more than a touchdown at home in Tuscaloosa in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Okay, here are some of the trends, though, for the 8 teams that have gone into Tuscaloosa and won. Just for your information, 4 of those 8 teams that won, 4 of the 8 teams that have won in Tuscaloosa scored first. Okay, all 4 of those teams, of the 4 of the 8 that I talked about that scored first, all 4 of those teams never trailed at any point in their respective games. So 4 of the 8 scored first, and all 4 never trailed at any point. 5 of the 8 teams that have defeated Nick Saban's Alabama team in Tuscaloosa won the rushing yards battle. So over half that have been successful in beating Alabama at home outrushed them in the game. Also, 5 of the 8 teams won the turnover battle. So a little over half won the turnover battle. 2 of the teams were even in turnovers. So even, fair, square in turnovers. And only 1 team of the 8 has ever beat Saban at home while losing the turnover battle. Only 1 ever accomplished that. So it's not likely that if Texas loses the turnover battle on Saturday, that's a pretty good indicator that it's going to be really tough to win this football game. The combined turnover margin for the 8 teams that have beaten Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa is plus 13. So just putting that out there. Those are some trends. A couple more stats, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Of those 8 home losses, 3 of them occurred at night. 3 of them were night games. Okay? Those were as follows. Georgia in 2007 was a night game. LSU in 2011 was a night game, and Ole Miss in 2015 was a night game. Okay, 3 of those 8 teams went into Tuscaloosa at night and beat Alabama. 2 of those 3 teams never trailed in regulation. 2 of those 3 teams never trailed in regulation. And all 3 teams never trailed by 4 or more points. So the teams there's only been 3, but the teams that have gone to Tuscaloosa and won a night game basically have either stayed within a field goal or never trailed at any point in the game. Historically, if you get down by more than basically a field goal in a night game in Tuscaloosa against Nick Saban, you are not winning that football game. Now, does that mean anything for Saturday? I don't know. And I'm not saying that it does. But just putting it out there. And one last stat. Since Texas A&M joined the SEC back in 2012, no team has gone to Tuscaloosa and won a game while trailing at any point in the game. So in other words, since A&M joined the SEC, no team has trailed at any point in a game in Tuscaloosa and won the football game. So those are some stats. It's hard to win in Tuscaloosa is basically what I'm getting at. And if you want to win in Tuscaloosa, you're going to have to do the things that we talk about, the cliche things we talk about that are key to winning football games. I don't necessarily think Texas has to beat them in the rushing yards battle, but it'd be great to win the turnover battle. I mean, that's a place to start. And so, those are just some numbers to consider. I found those really interesting. And just fair warning to those Texas fans out there that, believe for whatever reasons Texas is going to win this game by 2 touchdowns. And maybe their opinions have changed since Saturday. Just fair warning, like that's never happened before in Nick Saban's time at Alabama. So if it doesn't happen, don't be surprised. I certainly won't. You certainly won't.
Yeah.
But there it is.
Yeah.
So, any more questions from our one viewer in the chat? If not, any parting shots?
My one parting shot is football will be back, man. NFL football is back tomorrow, and it's looking like Travis Kelce might not play and Chris Jones might not play. So we're not even into the season yet. We're less than 24 hours from the game, and shit's already hitting the fan. I can't wait.
Yeah, before we get off of here, let's talk a little bit about our in-season plan for the people on our main feed for what we're going to be doing during the NFL season. So what we did last year is starting about midweek, we stopped our week previews and our picks, right, for the upcoming games. What we ended up doing was we did our reaction episodes on like Monday or Tuesday. And so I think we're going to be doing those again after each NFL week. We're going to be doing our reaction episodes for what happened in the NFL that week. We got really good feedback on those last week. So we're going to be doing that. And then there will be individual games throughout the season that we'll be reacting to. Since tomorrow's opening night, we'll get on here and we'll do a live reaction after tomorrow's game. And then our power ranking series that we still have not finished yet, that will be finishing up, and y'all will get the rest of those episodes probably early next week or by the time week 2 has begun. Those will be out. So if you're wondering where those are, we're working on it, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet. So do you have anything else to add?
No, just keep an eye on those week recap episodes. We're gonna keep doing those, and we're gonna keep the game predictions pretty limited this year. I think just the main reason was it just felt like predicting all the games just felt monotonous and it felt repetitive and it felt like we were just talking about nothing for some of the games that just weren't that interesting in the grand scheme of things. So we hope you all enjoy this new format this year. We're gonna keep trying to switch it up, get it right, get the format right for us, and get it right for, in terms of making the best content possible. So that's really all there is to say.
Yeah, and I will continue to do this type of thing. Typically, it will happen on Tuesdays where I do my reactions to the previous week in college football. So if you're into that sort of thing, into what we did tonight, as someone obviously is, then continue to tune into that, and I will continue to try to bring on different guests to spice it up a little, and you will continue to see Emmy pretty often on here. So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in.